Good morning. It is a true joy to be together today. It's a blessing to have this moment to worship God as a church family, and we're thankful, of course, for all of you gathered in this room. Thankful also for those of you who are with us online today, and those that we love and miss seeing here with us when we're gathered in God's name. Glad that you're here this morning. So about a week or two ago, I heard a new song from a musical artist named Brett Dennen. I don't know if you've heard of him before. He's kind of one of those songwriter type people who straddles the line between folk and pop. And he's got a bit of a peculiar voice, but he's one of those ones that you can really tell he puts a lot of thought into the songs that he writes. Well, at any rate, about a year ago, he wrote this song, a really lovely song called Junk Life. Now, I know that it doesn't sound like that would be a lovely song, a junk life. It sounds more like one of those TV shows about hoarders or about pawn shop owners that you see from time to time, something like that. But actually, it's a song that Brett Dennen wrote about his 1-year-old son as he watched his little boy crawl around and play on the living room rug. He was watching his boy, 1 year old, playing on the floor as he was thinking about this song that he wanted to write about what he hoped his son's life would be. So the song is really just it's like future advice to his son who is growing up. And actually, there's a line in the song that talks about how Brett Dennen wants to teach his son early the things that he learned late in life. So, probably a lot of parents can relate with that too, right? Wanting to teach your children at an early age the things that maybe you had to learn through experience. So he writes this song. It's advice for his young son. Basically, his advice boils down to this. His advice is, don't succumb to the junk life. Junk friends, junk food, junk love, junk information. Don't succumb to the junk life. Hold yourself to the higher vibration. Now, that last part, I'm not sure totally what he means by that, the higher vibration. But the first part, I think I do know very well what he means by it. This father's advice to his young son, if I can put it into my own words, is that there is so much noise out there in this world competing for your attention. There are relationships and influences that will compete for real estate in your heart. There are so many things promising to be the real thing, like real love, real truth, real wisdom, that are actually just junk. That are really valueless and just clutter you up and weigh you down. And if you spend your life seeking after those things, it's not going to fill you up like you think it will. So don't succumb to the junk life. I wonder, what do you think about all that? Do you think that's good advice? Do you think that there's some truth in that? If so, then I think we're sort of starting to clear the way for what our passage today is going to say to us from Colossians. Now, we are continuing today, I should say, in our series on Colossians that we began near the start of this year. I appreciate Colby rounding out the end of chapter 2 for us in our sermon last week. And that means today we are beginning a new chapter of this letter, Colossians chapter 3, if you'd like to get out a Bible and be turning there. Colossians chapter 3, the first part of that passage is where we're going to be spending our time today. And as we read a little bit of this passage together in just a moment, I think that you will probably see right away why we started today with that song about the junk life. Because in this passage, it's kind of like Paul's version of that same fatherly advice Only in this case, Paul is a whole lot clearer about what that higher thing is that we ought to strive for and seek after instead. In fact, that's actually where the passage begins, right from the top. Colossians chapter 3, we'll start in verse 1. It says, "If then you have been raised with Christ, seek the things that are above, where Christ is, seated at the right hand of God. Set your minds on things that are above, not on things that are on earth, for you have died, and your life is hidden with Christ in God. When Christ, who is your life, appears, then you also will appear with him in glory. Put to death, therefore, what is earthly in you: sexual immorality, impurity, passion, evil desire, and covetousness, which is idolatry. On account of these things, the wrath of God is coming, and in these you too once walked when you were living in them. But now you must put them all away: anger, wrath, malice, slander, and obscene talk from your mouth. Do not lie to one another, seeing that you have put off the old self with its practices, and have put on the new self, which is being renewed in knowledge after the image of its creator. For here there is not Greek and Jew, circumcised and uncircumcised, barbarian, Scythian, slave, and free. Christ is all and is in all. So put on then, as God's chosen ones, holy and beloved, compassionate hearts, kindness, humility, meekness, and patience, bearing with one another, and if anyone has a complaint against another, forgiving each other. As the Lord has forgiven you, so you also must forgive. And above all, put on love, which binds everything together in perfect harmony. Now, I know that was a lot of information there to take in, but do you hear what this passage is? Do you hear what it's saying to us today? Do you get the message? Are you really listening to what it has to say for our lives? From the very start, it says that the Christian life, in this Christian life, it matters what we set our minds on. In this Christian life, it matters what we seek. Those two verbs, set and seek, are the first two things that Paul says to us. And to each one of those verbs, Paul attaches the same word right after. The word above. What is he saying? Christians ought to set our minds on something higher. Christians ought to seek with our lives what he calls here the things above. So what does that mean then, the things above? Above what? Well, above the earthly stuff. That's what the rest of the verse says. Above the junk life, so to speak. I think what I hear this passage saying to me is that there is a better way to live than the one that our world so often is telling us about. And there's more to life than what you buy. There's more to life than what you earn or accumulate or store up for yourself. There's more to life than what you distract yourself with. There's more to life than what's reported on the nightly news. There's more to life than what you see on social media, which is mostly ads anyway. There's more to life than what you scroll through on your phone. There's so much more. There's something that's above the noise and the clutter and the junk. What is it? Paul, you're telling us that there's more to life. There's some better way to live. But what is it? Where do I find it? What are those things above? It's simple, really. At least we're going to try to make it simple today. If you want to know what that better life is, I would point to two things. If you want to know what the better life is, it is the life that is lived to be with Christ. And it is the life that is lived to be like Christ. With Christ. Like Christ. Let's focus on that first one first, because that's really what the beginning of the passage, the first part, was all about. I'm going to put the first part of Colossians back up on the screen again. Did you notice how many times in those first 4 or so verses of the passage it talks about or uses a phrase like with Christ or something very similar to it? It's actually all throughout the passage. Check it out. It says, if you have been raised with Christ. I believe that's talking about when we're baptized. When we're baptized, we're like raised up out of the water, raised into this new life with Christ. That's what baptism does for us. It says, if you have been raised with Christ, then live your life like you want to be with Christ. Make it your goal to be with Christ. Isn't that kind of what the next part of the passage says, right? If then you have been raised with Christ, seek the things that are above, where Christ is, seated at the right hand of God. Well, where is he talking about? Of course, he's talking about heaven. That's where Christ is, seated at the right hand of God. So to make it very simple, like seek heaven. Make it your goal. Make it your goal to be with Christ forever. Set your mind on that goal. The goal of being with Christ. But at the same time, know that it's not just this future thing for us. Even now, as we live our lives today, Christ is with us in that too. We sang a song about that this morning when we talked about being hidden in the presence of God under his wings, right? Because even now in this life, we can build up that life with him. We can build up that relationship with him. So what Paul says next in the passage is, for you have died, which might sound strange. So we haven't, obviously we haven't literally died. But again, remember he was just talking about our baptism. I think he's talking about that again. In baptism, many of you know this, but if not, you need to. In baptism, it's like our old life dies and our new life begins. We go down into the water, we die to ourselves, we're raised up again in new life, just like Christ died and rose again to save us. We share in that, we participate in it in our baptism. Well, what Paul says here is that when you've been baptized, like when you have died, so to speak, something beautiful happens. Your life is hidden with Christ in God. Not your life will one day be with Christ, but this is what is. It's like Paul's way of saying, you are in the here and now, wrapped up in the presence of Christ. Like a child gets buried in a deep hug from a loving mother, or like a child knows the strong arms of a protective father. And being with Christ is not just something we wait for, not just something in the future, not just something in heaven. Christ is with us now. And then one day, when Christ, who is your life, verse 4, appears, you will find out what it means to be with Christ, on a whole other level. You'll find out what it means to be with him in glory. So all that to say, throughout all of these verses here, there's this focus on being with Christ. And it says, make it your goal to live a life with Christ, both now and forever. Set your mind on it in the here and now, how you can be with Christ. Seek a life with Christ that will never end. And we hope for it in the future, but it starts now. And what Paul is essentially saying is that that kind of life, the one that's seeking to be with Christ, that's a better way to live. It's a better way to live than all of those other things that promise a lot in this life but don't actually deliver. So let's talk about how do we do that then? How do we live that better life that's focused on being with Christ? Well, if we want to live with Christ, then what the rest of the passage says is that we need to try to live like Christ. Living like Christ ought to be our goal and aim as well. This also should be what we're setting our minds on in the here and now. And this next part of the passage is probably the part that really challenges us. It challenges me. Because the whole rest of the passage that we read today is really about making those needed changes in our lives that help us to live more like Christ. It's actually kind of cool the way that Paul gets his point across. You know, a good teacher, I'm speaking to the world of teachers today. I know that College Hill is like just the land of 1,000 teachers. So you guys can tell me if this is true or not. But I think that a good teacher is often one who can make their point, make it simply, illustrate it well, like make it visual, like make it really come to life. Many of you do that in your jobs all the time. I think Paul is a good teacher like that in the rest of this part of the passage. And the visual he gives here, sort of the example he gives for how we ought to live that life that looks like Christ, is something we can all relate with. It's like putting on a new set of clothes, he says. Or maybe better put, it's putting on the right set of clothes, like the right clothes for the right situation. We probably all experienced at some point in time what it's like to be wearing the wrong set of clothes for the wrong situation. Like if you ever walked into a room and thought, boy, I'm really overdressed for this. Or maybe the baggy gym shorts and the old Mavs t-shirt was not the best idea for this. You know, I've had that one before. How many of you have ever gone to a Friday night high school football game in November, and when you get there, the sun's up and you're in your long sleeve shirt and your jeans, and by the middle of the third quarter, when the sun has gone down, you are just freezing and shivering on those metal bleachers, like feeling like you should have dressed for the Arctic tundra. It's so cold out there at that football game. Like, we know what it's like to be wearing the wrong clothes for the situation that we're in. You know, most of my life growing up, I didn't really have to worry about that all that much. It's kind of nice, at least on school days. Some of you may know I grew up going to school across the street at Fort Worth Christian School, and if you go there, you have the joy of wearing a uniform to school every day. So you have to make important decisions in the morning, like khaki shorts or khaki pants. Which ones do I want today? Red polo, blue polo. It's a big decision, big social decision for your fashion choices there. Well, most days of the week were like that for me, except on rare occasions, they would have like days where you could choose to dress however you wanted to, right? Sometimes it'd be on special days like homecoming week, or spirit weeks. They might have times where you could kind of dress with a certain theme or just choose to wear whatever you want. I remember one day in particular, I always think about this when I read this part of the passage. I remember one day in particular, I was in middle school, and I left the house early in the morning with my basketball gym bag packed, filled with camouflage clothes. There was going to be camo day at school. I'm not sure if I ever told you this before. Maybe I have. I had my camo shirt, my camo pants, my camo hat. You're probably surprised I even own all of these things, but every now and then I used to go dove hunting with my granddad, so I had all these clothes. They'd take the tag off of them and wear them to school that day. And Then I got to practice, and I was met with a little bit of a shock. My teammates told me, no, you've got it all wrong. Camo Day is next week. You heard the announcement wrong. And I was so relieved that they told me because, as a middle schooler, the worst thing you can do is just be the one standing out in the middle of the hall. I was so relieved. I was going to be so embarrassed. So I ran home. I literally ran home to my house down the street and got my school uniform, left the camo clothes behind, went back to school for a normal day. And that's when I saw my brother in the hall. And he had this angry look on his face. And that's when I remembered that he had been absent the day before. And I had gone home that night and told him what I thought was true about it being Camo Day at school the next day. And there he was walking between the classes. He's all decked out from head to toe, looking like he wants to hunt me and shoot me. And never before has someone been so camouflaged and yet stood out so much as he did on that day. And he was very frustrated with me. I think I would have been too. And it's very uncomfortable. And for a middle schooler especially, it's almost downright embarrassing to be wearing the wrong clothes for the wrong situation. Like all of us probably try to avoid that every day of our lives. And yet what Paul says to the Colossians in the rest of this passage is that if you're Christians now, you're trying to live your life with Christ, when did we get so comfortable wearing the wrong kind of clothes? Not literally like the wrong kind of clothes, but the analogy is, in verse 9, when we become Christians, we put off the old self with its practices, and we put on a new self. Some of your translations, if you're following along in a Bible, for verse 10, they might say, clothe yourself with a new self. And that's a good way of putting it. What he's saying is that when you become a Christian, it's like you stepped into this whole new situation. You need to dress accordingly. So Christians then ought to clothe themselves, so to speak, with things like compassion, kindness, humility, meekness and patience and forgiveness, and above all, love. These qualities are like our uniform. They're like how we show Christ to the world. It's how we come to look like, live like Christ. And this is what your new life is like now. It's your new set of clothes. But then he's also challenging us to think about, why do we still have these other things in the closet? Sexual immorality, impurity, passion, there's a lack of self-control, evil desires, covetousness, envy, idolatry. Paul says, put away the old clothes, like the stuff you used to wear, the stuff people used to see in you, like anger and wrath and malice and slander and obscene talk and lying. If we make those our character, if that's how we live and act, then it's like wearing the totally wrong thing for the situation. Like wearing Camo Day instead of your uniform on the wrong day. Like wearing ski boots to try to go swimming. It's just not right. I like this analogy. I think it works really well. Paul's a good teacher to use this analogy. The clothing. It works because clothes are something we choose every day that others see. And that's kind of like what our lives are like in Christ too. How we live our lives in Christ is something we choose every day, and others are going to see it. So Paul says you've got to make that choice. If you got things like that in your life, you got to try to get rid of it. Throw it out like clothes that are never going to go back in style. They're never going to fit you anymore. Throw it out like junk. Because people are going to see how you live. So let them see Christ in you instead. Live a life like Christ is his message. Choose those qualities that we learn from him, like compassion and humility and forgiveness and love. That's the right clothes for who we are now. And if you want to live a life with Christ, then we've got to try to live a life like Christ. Don't go back to the old set of clothes. Maybe there's something in this chapter that speaks to you today. If you spend a little time in your Bible this week, maybe spend a little time with those verses 5 through 14. There's probably something for everyone in there. Whether it's something to put off or something to put on, there's probably something for everyone there. Something we can choose that others see. So let me then, as we wrap up, just come back to the advice from the beginning. Don't succumb to the junk life. Instead, let's set our minds on things above. Let's seek with our lives those things above, make those changes we might need to make to live that better life. And if that means coming to Christ in baptism today, then let's do that so that you can start your life with Him. Died and risen again for a new life. Let's help one another along the way to live lives that look more like Him. Let's respond to this message while we stand, while we sing.